Some stories don't begin with love or luck. They begin with cruelty. When three men set up a quiet, single-dad janitor on a fake blind date, pairing him with a deaf former commander just to humiliate them, no one expected what happened next. Not the men behind the prank. Not the people watching. Not even the woman who thought she'd forgotten how to trust. But with one simple gesture, one silent language, this humble single dad turned a cruel joke into a miracle that left an entire room in tears. And it was only the beginning. Before we start this unforgettable journey of kindness, courage, and healing, if you believe quiet heroes still exist, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. The last rays of a fading Virginia sun brushed against the windows of Riverside Grill, warming the polished wood and soft gold lights of the restaurant. It was the kind of place where officers came to celebrate promotions and where civilians came to feel a little less lonely on Friday nights. For Brandon Hale Cross, a single dad janitor who once spent years reading the broken minds of soldiers as a battlefield psychologist, it was simply a rare moment away from the constant demands of raising Avery. He stepped inside quietly, adjusting the collar of his faded olive green jacket, still the only piece of clothing that felt like home. His hair grazed his shoulders, and though his face carried gentle lines of exhaustion, it also held the calm strength of someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. He wasn't here for romance. He wasn't here for anything, really, just a chance to sit somewhere that didn't smell like cleaning chemicals or late-night hallway coffee. The invitation had seemed harmless enough. "Let us set you up on a date, man. You deserve it." He should have questioned it. At a corner table, Brett Howard and Alden were already waiting three men who worked at the same base facility. Three men who never understood why everyone instinctively respected Brandon, even though he was just a janitor. They believed he was hiding something, playing humble to get sympathy, and they hated him for it. Brett elbowed the others as Brandon entered. "There he is." Our miracle janitor Brett muttered with a smirk. Howard stifled a laugh, lifting his phone like he was about to film a comedy show. "You ready for this? She'll never see it coming." And neither will he. Alden grinned, the kind of grin that came from insecurity disguised as humor. Blind date with a deaf woman. He'll look like a complete fool. Watch. They didn't care about the damage they were about to cause. Not to Brandon. Not to the woman they had dragged into this. And certainly not to the truth. Brandon approached the table he'd been assigned, unaware of the trap. He rested his palms lightly on the linen tablecloth and exhaled. It felt strange sitting here alone without Avery's little hand in his, without the constant responsibility humming in his mind. For a moment, he almost allowed himself to hope tonight would be peaceful. Behind him, the trio of troublemakers whispered and snickered, their phones ready. A soft breeze lifted the restaurant's curtains as the front door opened again. The room seemed to still. Brandon looked up. A woman walked in, poised, striking her posture unmistakably military. Her uniform jacket was immaculate, her blonde hair tied in a clean ponytail. But it wasn't the uniform that caught Brandon's attention. It was her eyes, determined, searching, and carrying a quiet loneliness he recognized instantly because he had seen it in the mirror. Hannah Reeves, former Navy commander, decorated officer, retired too early after a blast robbed her of most of her hearing, her stability, and the life she once knew. She hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room with practiced composure. She didn't hear the whispers. She didn't hear the laughter. But she could read lips, and she caught just enough to sense something wasn't right. Brandon's chest tightened. They wouldn't have. But the look in Brett's eyes, giddy, cruel, answered everything. This wasn't a date. This was a setup, a joke, at her expense, at his. And something inside Brandon shifted, the same protective instinct that once helped him pull broken soldiers back from the edges of their own minds. Hannah approached the table slowly. She was impeccably strong on the outside, but Brandon could see the flicker of apprehension beneath the surface. She didn't know she was walking into a trap. She only knew someone had asked her to meet, and she had forced herself, despite fear, despite trauma, to show up. Brandon stood immediately, offering a gentle smile. Not the nervous smile of a man on a date, but the grounded warmth of someone who wanted to shield her from whatever harm was coming. Hannah tried to speak, her lips forming careful words. "Are you Brandon?" Her voice was faint, shaped by someone who hadn't heard her own tone in years. Brandon nodded, but something in the way she watched his lips told him everything he needed to know. She didn't hear the room. She didn't hear him. But she was alert to every movement, every expression. So he did something the three men never expected. Something they absolutely did not plan for. He raised his hands and signed. "Yes, I'm Brandon. It's good to meet you." Hannah froze, as though the floor disappeared beneath her. Her breath caught. Her shoulders, tense from years of vigilance, slowly lowered. She blinked once, twice, and then her expression softened in a way that made the entire restaurant dim and brighten all at once. Behind them, Brett's jaw dropped. Howard lowered his phone. Alden sputtered silently. The joke collapsed before it even began. Hannah signed back, her hands trembling slightly. "You know ASL?" Brandon nodded. "I worked with deaf soldiers. Long time ago." He didn't say before the fire, before I lost my wife, before I became a janitor, because I could no longer bear being the man everyone leaned on. But the shadows in his eyes said enough. The restaurant noise faded into the background. All that remained was the silent conversation between two people who had been wounded by life in different ways, but in this single fragile moment seemed less alone. Hannah exhaled shakily, then sat down, her gaze never leaving his. It wasn't romantic yet. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply human, kind, real. And somehow that made it more powerful than anything the men at the back could stage. Brett cursed under his breath. Why the hell does he know sign language? Howard swallowed. That wasn't in the plan. Alden sighed. We're screwed. But Brandon wasn't paying attention to them anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't defined by grief or by the mop he pushed down endless hallways or by the quiet sacrifices no one ever saw. For the first time in years, someone looked at him and really saw him. And the night had only just begun. The low hum of conversation filled Riverside Grill, but for Hannah Reeves' sound had long been a memory rather than a sensation. She felt the world in vibrations, now the faint tremor of a door, closing, the subtle shift of air, when someone walked past, the nearly imperceptible pulse of footsteps on wooden floors. She had learned to read these signs with soldier-like precision, piecing them together, the way others piece together sounds. Tonight, every vibration felt sharper, heavier, like walking back into a battlefield she'd sworn to avoid. She had almost turned around twice before entering. Dating wasn't part of her life anymore. It hadn't been since the blast in Helmand Province 3 years ago, a roar of light and heat that stole her hearing, her balance, her confidence, and eventually her career. She had survived, but every room full of strangers still felt like a threat she couldn't fully defend against. Yet someone had reached out, someone who had been unusually kind in their message. Just a quiet dinner. Meeting someone who understands service. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe she still had the right to moments of normalcy. But as she stepped into the restaurant and saw the flash of a phone raised in the back corner, a familiar tension crept into her chest. It wasn't the device that bothered her. It was the expression mocking entertained. She knew that look. Too many wounded veterans knew that look. Pity disguised as humor. Curiosity sharpened into cruelty. Her pulse sped up. Then she saw him. Brandon stood as she approached, and instantly the unease in her chest loosened just a fraction. He had kind eyes, steady posture, and a calm, grounded presence rare in men she met. There was something old in his gaze, something that had survived storms and carried the weight of them quietly. He wasn't startled by her hearing aids. He wasn't confused by the way she scanned the room. He simply watched her with a gentleness that did not need translation. She spoke carefully, measuring each word by the movement of her lips. "Are you Brandon?" And then it happened, something she never expected. His hands rose, slow, deliberate, precise, American Sign Language. "Yes, I'm Brandon. It's truly good to meet you." The breath left her lungs. For a moment, she simply stared, unable to move. Her heart felt too full, too shocked, too relieved. The world often made her feel like the problem, like she was the one slowing things down, the one who had to adapt, the one who made others uncomfortable. But here, in a single elegant motion of his hands, Brandon had done the adapting for her. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Her reply trembled. "You know ASL." He nodded, a faint sadness flickering beneath his smile. "Worked with deaf soldiers. A long time ago." There was a weight to the phrase "a long time ago" that ran deeper than the words themselves. She recognized it instantly. Soldiers knew the difference between everyday sorrow and the kind of sorrow that left a permanent signature in someone's eyes. Brandon carried the ladder. She sat down. He followed, gentle, careful, as if he sensed she needed to ease into this moment slowly. The restaurant lights cast a warm glow across their table, but Hannah noticed the trio in the back corner again. Their lips moved in laughter, their expressions twisted with disappointment, now like a prank gone wrong. And she realized they hadn't set this up to help her. They hadn't set this up to help him. They had set it up to laugh. She straightened her spine unconsciously, years of military discipline sliding back into place. She'd been used before, misunderstood, underestimated. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in that vulnerability. Brandon followed her gaze briefly, then signed quietly. "Ignore them. Let's make this our night." Something warm, fragile, and dangerously hopeful bloomed in her chest. She signed back. "You don't have to be kind just because you feel sorry for me." His expression softened, touched with hurt, not offense, but empathy. "I don't feel sorry for you. I respect you." Hannah had been respected as an officer. She'd been respected as a strategist, as a leader, as a fighter who never backed down. But as a woman, as a person outside uniform, as someone worthy of gentleness rather than pity, it had been a long time. Brandon lifted the wine menu and subtly angled it, so she could read his lips when he spoke. "Red or white?" She smiled despite herself. "Red," he ordered with confident ease, nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress. Just simple choices, thoughtful pauses and glances that told her he wasn't here to perform. He was here to see her. The server left them alone, and beneath the low chandelier, the world slowed. Brandon's fingers tapped lightly against the table. "Do you mind signing?" he asked, forming the words slowly for her to read. "Or would you prefer to speak?" She hesitated. Most people grew impatient after 5 minutes of signing, even family, even old colleagues. Speech was easier for them. Signing was easier for her. So the choice always became a sacrifice, hers or theirs. Brandon made it simple. He signed, fluent, comfortable, almost graceful. Her throat tightened. "Signing is easier for me." "Then that's what we'll do." She clasped her hands to steady them. Not many people take the time. Brandon shook his head. "You shouldn't have to fight for every conversation." And there it was, the sentence that pierced straight through her armor. Not pity, not flattery, understanding. the kind that could only come from someone who had been broken in his own way. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, studying the quiet confidence in his posture, the faint shadows under his eyes, the strong but gentle hands resting on the table. He felt familiar, though she couldn't explain why. Not because she'd known him before, but because he felt like someone who understood what it meant to lose something you could never fully recover. Behind them, Brett whispered angrily to the other two. Their little plan had dissolved. The mockery, the recording, they no longer had a target. They had underestimated both of them. But Hannah no longer cared. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't humiliation. This was the first moment in years she felt seen. Brandon raised his hands again, slower this time, more deliberate. "Shall we start over? Hi, I'm Brandon Hale Cross." She smiled, full genuine shy. "I'm Hannah Reeves. 2 wounded souls, 2 quiet survivors, 2 strangers who by sheer accident or divine timing had found each other in the ruins of a cruel setup." And for the first time that evening, Hannah let herself hope that this night might become something far more meaningful than anyone expected, especially the ones who wanted to see them fall. For a few seconds, it felt as if the entire world had forgotten to breathe. Conversations at nearby tables softened. Forks paused mid-air. Servers froze half-step beside drink trays. Nothing in Riverside Grill was louder than the silent movement of Brandon's hands as he signed to Hannah with the calm confidence of someone who had used this language not once, but countless times in moments that mattered. To everyone else, ASL looked like elegant gestures. To Hannah, it was the sound of her world opening again. She couldn't remember the last time someone met her where she'd stood. Not in pity, not in awkwardness, but in fluency. Her fingers trembled before she responded, signing cautiously, as if afraid the moment might shatter. "How long did you work with deaf soldiers?" Brandon smiled a small, almost shy smile, but there was something heavy beneath it. Long enough to know most of their battles were invisible. Invisible battles. Her breath tightened. That was exactly what she lived with. He didn't press further. He didn't turn it into a story about his heroism the way some men did when they discovered she served. Instead, he simply met her eyes with understanding. Quiet, unspoken, profoundly gentle. Behind them, the trio of troublemakers, Brett, Howard, and Alden, stared in stunned disbelief. The prank they had spent a week plotting had collapsed in 3 seconds because Brandon had done the one thing they never anticipated. He respected her. Howard lowered his phone slowly, his smirk dying. Brett's face flushed red with frustration. Alden whispered, "Dude, he knows sign language. How are we supposed to know? Because they never cared to know him. They never bothered to look deeper." But Hannah was looking now. "Do you mind if I listen by reading lips?" she asked out loud, her voice soft-shaped with cautious precision. Brandon nodded warmly. "Whatever makes you comfortable." He didn't exaggerate his words. He didn't patronize her with over-enunciated lips. He simply spoke naturally, clear, steady, respectful. She studied his mouth, then his eyes. He was patient. He knew how to communicate with someone like her, someone whose body still startled at sudden movement, whose hearing aids sometimes hissed in crowded rooms, whose world was stitched together by courage she never received credit for. Their waiter approached, clearing his throat to get their attention. Hannah felt the vibration through the floorboards and turned first. "Ready to order?" the waiter asked. Brandon looked to her, letting her take the lead. But the menu's text shimmered slightly. Her vision always blurred when her equilibrium wavered. The lights above felt too bright, too sharp. Before the anxiety could tighten her chest, Brandon lifted the menu gently so she wouldn't have to strain angling it away from the glare. No fuss, no attention drawn. Just Help simple and kind. Hannah felt her throat thicken. She pointed to a dish, and Brandon repeated it clearly for the waiter, making sure his lips were visible. "She'll have the rosemary chicken, please." The waiter nodded and left. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Hannah reached for her water glass, her fingers brushing Brandon's. She pulled back quickly, startled by the sudden warmth that sparked from the contact. He didn't apologize. He didn't make it awkward. He simply smiled, soft but sincere. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Then Brandon lifted his hands again. "I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't know they planned this." Hannah shook her head. "I figured it out. People have odd reactions to my disability." Brandon's expression deepened into something heavier, something protective. "There's nothing wrong with you, Hannah." Her breath caught. She had heard variations of that phrase for years, but usually from well-meaning therapists or friends who didn't understand what daily life without hearing truly felt like. But when Brandon said it, it didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like truth, the kind spoken by someone who had lived through his own trauma and recognized another survivor. She signed slowly. The blast. It changed everything. Sound became memories. Silence became my life. Brandon didn't flinch. He didn't pity. He simply nodded, eyes steady. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's where healing begins. Her lips parted slightly. That was something she had believed once, before the nightmares, before the dizziness, before she learned how cruel people could be when they didn't understand you. But looking at him now, she felt something shift. Healing didn't feel impossible. It felt near. Behind her, a chair scraped loudly across the floor, a vibration she felt through her shoes. She turned instinctively, startled. Brandon's hand rested lightly on the table, steadying, grounding, not touching her, just giving her a point of calm to focus on. "You're safe," he said slowly for her to read. She exhaled, the tension easing from her shoulders. This man, this quiet janitor, had the presence of someone who once carried soldiers through emotional minefields, not by dominance, not by force, but by making the world feel less frightening. She studied him more closely now. His hands bore faint calluses. His hair brushed the top of his jacket collar. His eyes looked tired, yet fiercely alive. He didn't fit the image of a janitor, nor the stereotype of a soldier. He was something in between, someone who lived a different, deeper life than anyone around him realized. Hannah signed carefully. "You said you worked with deaf soldiers. Why did you leave the field?" Brandon looked down for a moment. The shadows in his expression deepened, the kind of grief that had weight and shape and history. "I lost someone," he said slowly, letting her read his lips. "Someone I never got over." Her heart softened. "Your wife," he nodded once. Pain flickered behind his eyes, raw, unresolved, still breathing. Silence settled between them again. But now it wasn't awkward. It was shared. Two wounded lives, two quiet storms sitting across from each other in a restaurant meant for simpler stories. Hannah signed gently. "Thank you for speaking to me in my language." Brandon shook his head, his smile small but full. "Thank you for meeting me where I am too." And just like that, the world inside Riverside Grill shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the subtle power of a miracle unfolding in slow motion. The prank was over, the mockery defeated. The night no longer belonged to cruelty. It belonged to them, and to the quiet beginning of something neither of them thought they would ever feel again. The restaurant had settled into a soft evening rhythm by the time their entrees arrived. Clinking glasses, quiet laughter from neighboring tables, and the gentle hum of overhead lights blended into a distant blur that Hannah could no longer hear, but she felt it through the atmosphere like the ghost of a world she once knew. Across the table, Brandon watched her with a steady patience, that made her feel oddly safe. Not spotlighted, not studied. Simply seen. She rarely talked about her past outside clinical sessions. Most men she met became uncomfortable within minutes, shifting in their seats, offering half-hearted condolences, or worst of all, trying to fix her. But tonight felt different. Brandon didn't treat her trauma like a puzzle to solve or an obstacle to pity. He treated it like something human. When she finally signed her question, "Why did you leave the field?" his eyes had dropped, and the grief on his face was unmistakable. Now, as the server walked away and they were alone again, he inhaled slowly and looked at her with a kind of vulnerability she never expected from a man so quietly composed. "I didn't just lose my wife," Brandon said, forming each word clearly for her to read. "I lost my ability to keep doing the work." Hannah waited. He didn't rush. Her name was Elise, he continued. She was a Navy nurse, brighter than anyone I knew, braver than she ever gave herself credit for. His voice softened with memory. She was hit by a drunk driver while volunteering at a community clinic. "I was in Afghanistan when it happened." Hannah's shoulders lowered as she absorbed the meaning behind his steady gaze. Distance could be a wound all its own, one that left scars invisible to everyone except those who carried them. Brandon continued, words almost trembling at the edges. "I spent 10 years teaching soldiers how to cope with guilt and grief, but when it became my turn, I couldn't apply a single thing I taught." She reached for the water glass, her fingers brushing the air near his, but stopping short. Not out of fear, out of respect, out of understanding. She signed slowly. "Grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care what we know." His eyes flicked up, warmed by the accuracy of her words. "No," he agreed softly. "It doesn't." For a few seconds, silence stretched between them, not empty, but profound. An acknowledgement that healing wasn't a straight line, and that some wounds never fully closed. They simply softened with time. Hannah's turn came next. She had told parts of her story before, usually in sterile military settings, with therapists who meant well, but never understood the sensory chaos of losing sound explosively violently in the middle of a war zone. But Brandon didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't push. His silence invited honesty instead of demanding it. So she began. "It was a Tuesday," she said aloud, shaping the words carefully. "We were scouting a compound just outside Lashkar Gah. I was leading a team of 4, routine recon. Then, everything went white." Brandon didn't blink. "I woke up on the ground. Dust everywhere. No sound. None. My lips were bleeding from screaming." She managed a half smile, the kind that hid as much as it revealed. "But I couldn't hear myself. Couldn't hear anything." She paused, steadying her breath. "The blast took 2 men. Another was injured. And her hand touched one hearing aid gently. I never got my hearing back." Brandon didn't look away, didn't give her pity. His expression held something else, recognition, maybe even admiration. She continued, voice quiet. "And after that, the Navy said I could stay. But leadership wasn't the same. Communication risks, field limitations. And she swallowed. I didn't want to be a liability. So I retired." Brandon leaned forward slightly. "You weren't a liability." "Try telling that to a wall of paperwork," she said, with a soft, dry smile. He almost smiled back, so she added, fingers tapping the table lightly. "I left, moved into a small apartment, cut ties with most people. Life became quieter than I expected." Brandon considered her words, and then he signed something that caught her completely off guard. "Silence is easier to face when someone else is willing to sit in it with you." Her breath caught again. How did he do that? How did he speak so precisely to the parts of her she didn't voice? Her fingers moved before she had time to think. I've never met anyone who made me feel understood without trying. Brandon blinked, momentarily struck. I could say the same. The energy between them softened, shifted. Not romantic yet, not bold. But a fragile thread of connection wove itself between their stories, their wounds, their unspoken fears. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah spoke aloud, watching his lips carefully. "Anything." She hesitated. "Why did you agree to this blind date?" "Really?" He leaned back in his chair, exhaling a truth he hadn't planned to share tonight. "I didn't want to," he admitted, "but my coworkers pushed, said I needed a night out. And maybe they were right." He paused, gaze dropping for a second. "I've spent a long time hiding." Hannah tilted her head. "Hiding from what life," Brandon said simply. "The kind of life where someone asks how your day went. The kind where you let yourself care again." He hesitated, voice softening. "The kind where you don't spend every night alone with your daughter trying to be both parents and not falling apart." Warmth flooded her chest. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was telling the truth. So she matched his honesty. "I hide too," she whispered. "I pretend I'm fine." That losing sound wasn't losing half my world. That I'm not afraid to let someone close because what if they walk away? What if I'm too much work? What if I'm not enough? Brandon shook his head slowly. "You're not too much work. And you're more than enough." Her throat tightened. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, solid, grounded, without hesitation. Her hands moved instinctively. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He answered with the same truthfulness that colored everything he had said since she arrived. "Because someone once saved me with kindness. And I've been waiting a long time to pass that forward." Hannah looked at him, eyes shimmering, not with pain, but with the first small flicker of hope she had felt in years. In that gentle space carved out of two broken histories, something quietly extraordinary began to take shape. Not love. Not yet. But trust. A foundation stronger than romance, deeper than sympathy. Two wounded souls carrying their scars with dignity, sharing a meal under warm lights, learning that brokenness didn't make them unlovable. It made them human. It made them real. It made them perfect for someone who understood. And tonight, they understood each other more than either expected. Saturday morning sunlight spilled across the quiet cul-de-sac where Brandon lived with his 7-year-old daughter, Avery. The small, cozy house, warm lights, hand-painted stars on the bedroom ceiling, mismatched furniture, softened by love, felt like a world he had built, piece by piece, after Elise died. A sanctuary for a little girl who deserved better than loss. Today, though, his sanctuary felt oddly smaller because something unfamiliar was stirring inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He tried to hide it, but Avery noticed everything. "Daddy," she said, sitting at the breakfast table with her hair in a slightly crooked ponytail. She'd attempted herself. "You've been smiling all morning." Brandon paused mid-sip of coffee. "Have I, She nodded with innocent certainty. "Is it because of your friend?" His eyebrows rose. "My friend?" "The lady with the pretty eyes," Avery said. "The one you talked about last night." Brandon felt warmth creep into his face. He hadn't talked much, just the essentials. But even small details were enough for Avery. She was born with her mother's intuition and her father's heart. He didn't answer immediately. Avery leaned closer, elbows on the table. "Are we going to meet her?" He smiled despite himself. "Maybe someday." Avery beamed. Okay. But destiny, as it seemed, wasn't waiting for someday. The meeting was unplanned. Hannah had come to drop off a thank you note. Just that. A simple gesture of gratitude she convinced herself didn't mean anything deeper, but her pulse told a different story as she stood on Brandon's porch, fiddling with the folded paper in her hands. She'd written it 3 times before settling on words that weren't too emotional, too personal, too revealing. She didn't know how to be vulnerable anymore, but she wanted to try. Before she could knock, the door swung open. Avery stood there, a stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, blinking up at Hannah with wide, curious eyes. Hannah froze, startled. Avery gasped softly, then smiled. "Your daddy's friend." Hannah blinked, the words landing gently but unexpectedly in her chest. She looked down at the child, bright brown eyes, soft freckles, a heart that seemed to shine through her smile. Before Hannah could respond, Avery quickly added, "Wait here." She darted inside. Brandon appeared seconds later, breathless, tie slightly crooked as if he'd been rushing. When he saw Hannah, his expression softened instantly. "Hannah," he said, speaking slowly enough for her to read. "I didn't expect to see you." She lifted the note, embarrassed. "I just wanted to drop this off." Their fingers brushed as he took it from her. A simple touch, but something warm rippled through her. She stepped back, nervous, wondering if she had overstepped. Then Avery returned with a small notebook and the concentrated expression of a child preparing for something important. She stepped directly in front of Hannah. Her little hands rose. "Nice to meet you." The sign was imperfect. One finger bent wrong, movement a little stiff, but Hannah's heart broke open anyway. She covered her mouth with trembling hands. Brandon froze behind her, stunned. Avery lowered her hands anxiously. "Did I do it wrong?" Hannah knelt, slowly steadying herself. Her voice caught as she spoke aloud, shaping the words with care. "You did it perfectly." Avery's smile nearly split her cheeks. "I practiced last night," she confessed. "Daddy taught me a little." And I looked up more on my tablet. Brandon didn't speak, but his eyes shone with something raw pride, tenderness, something deeper he hadn't let himself feel in years. Avery continued, signing slower, this time almost ceremonial. "I'm Avery." Hannah felt her chest tighten. A tear slipped before she could stop it. She tried signing back, but her fingers shook so much, she placed them gently over Avery's small hands instead. "I'm Hannah. I'm very happy to meet you too." Avery giggled then, in pure childlike fashion, wrapped her arms suddenly around Hannah's neck. Brandon inhaled sharply. Hannah's breath hitched, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she hadn't been held with such innocent warmth in years. She returned the hug, fragile at first, then more securely. When Avery finally pulled back, she touched one of Hannah's hearing aids, gently, not with curiosity, but with reverence. "My mommy had special ears too," she whispered. "She wore a machine at night to help her breathe." Brandon closed his eyes for a brief, aching second. He hadn't expected his daughter to bring up Elise today, but Hannah felt the weight of those words. She cupped Avery's cheek gently and signed, "Your mommy must have been very brave." Avery nodded proudly. "Daddy says so too." Silence settled around them, not heavy, not awkward, but tender. A silence that felt healing rather than empty. Brandon cleared his throat. "Would you like to come inside?" His voice was tentative, as if afraid she might say no. But Hannah didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." Inside, the living room glowed with the soft clutter of a child's home crayon drawings taped to the fridge, a puzzle half-finished on the rug, a small bookshelf decorated with stickers. Avery chose herself. It felt warm, alive, real. Hannah noticed a photo frame on the mantel. Elise, radiant smiling, holding baby Avery in a sunlit garden. Love shining so clearly it almost reached across time. Hannah touched the frame gently. "She was beautiful," she said. Brandon nodded, voice tight. "She would have liked you." Hannah blinked, startled by the unexpected warmth of the compliment. Avery climbed onto the couch and patted the space next to her. Hannah sit with me." The request felt like an invitation into something sacred. Hannah sat. Avery placed her tiny hand in Hannah's. "Can you teach me more?" Hannah's throat burned. "Of course," she whispered. They practiced simple signs. "Thank you, Red." Happy Avery repeating each one with enthusiasm, so pure, it made Hannah laugh softly. The sound breathy and fragile but real. Brandon stood in the doorway, watching them with a look Hannah didn't see, one that held awe, affection, and a dawning realization that something was happening he hadn't expected. Not just connection, not just comfort, healing. For both of them. When Avery leaned against Hannah's arm, resting her head there, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Hannah froze, then slowly, cautiously relaxed. No one had leaned on her in years. And as Brandon stepped closer, his voice quiet, but full of something more than gratitude, he said, "She likes you." Hannah looked at him, eyes shimmering. "I like her too." She signed back. Brandon smiled, small, genuine, the kind that came from a place deeper than politeness. And for the first time since her world went silent, Hannah felt a different kind of sound. One made not of noise, but of belonging. A sound she hadn't felt in years. Home. The week after Hannah visited Brandon's home felt like stepping into a new rhythm neither of them had expected. They exchanged quiet messages, practiced small ASL sentences over video calls, and shared moments that were gentle enough to not overwhelm, but warm enough to mean something. It was subtle, unrushed, healing. But peaceful weeks rarely lasted for people who carried scars, and old shadows often returned without warning. On a gray Wednesday morning, Brandon walked into the base facility carrying his thermos and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally let a bit of light back into his life. The hall smelled faintly of fresh polish his doing, and he moved with the steady purpose of someone who found meaning in the simplest acts of routine. But three familiar figures were waiting. Brett leaned against a desk, with a smug grin plastered across his face. Howard scrolled through something on his phone, snickering. Alden looked jittery, as if he was excited about something he shouldn't be excited about. Brandon felt tension hum low in his chest. "What's going on?" Brett tapped his phone screen. "You really should be more careful, Cross." Howard turned his screen toward Brandon. A video played. The video. Grainy footage of the night at Riverside Grill. Brandon standing when Hannah arrived. The moment he signed. Her stunned expression. Except it wasn't the real moment. The video had been edited with subtitles that painted Brandon as a manipulator. Fake captions read, "I work with deaf women all the time. You should feel lucky." Another fake line, "Do whatever I ask, and I'll make you feel normal." An even crueler one, "Let them laugh. It gets me sympathy later." Brandon recoiled, breath knocking out of him. "What did you do?" "Just a little truth adjustment," Brett said smugly. "We're helping people see who you really are," Alden chimed in with theatrical innocence. "I mean, how convenient you just happen to know sign language. Almost like you practiced it to impress vulnerable women," Howard added. And she fell for it. Hook, line, sinker. Rage flared in Brandon's chest, not hot or explosive, but cold and sharp. "Take it down." Brett shrugged. "Too late. It's on 3 group chats already, and circulating around the base community page. People love drama." Brandon stepped forward. "Take it down." Howard raised his hands in mock fear. "Whoa, careful now. Wouldn't want to look aggressive, especially while rumors fly." Alden smirked. Internal Affairs loves a good misconduct story. That word hit him like a blow. Misconduct. The same whisper that destroyed reputations before truth ever had a chance to fight back. He walked away before anger could make him do something he'd regret. But the damage had already begun. Hannah was the first to feel it. She was picking up groceries when a woman at the store paused beside her lips, moving slowly enough for Hannah to read. "I'm sorry for what he did to you," Hannah frowned. "Excuse me," the woman touched Hannah's arm gently. "I saw the video. You're very brave, being taken advantage of like that." Shock froze Hannah in place. Video taken advantage of her hands trembled on the grocery cart. She pulled out her phone and opened her messages. 2 missed texts from a former colleague, a third from a neighbor. All variations of the same thing. "I'm so sorry about that man. Be careful. He sounds manipulative. We should talk." "Are you okay?" Confusion began melting into dread. She typed a message to Brandon. "What video?" He replied instantly. "I'm coming over." When Brandon arrived, Hannah was standing on her porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The moment she saw him, her eyes searched his face not for affection, now, but for truth. Brandon stopped 2 steps in front of her chest, heaving from running. He didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, opened the edited video, and handed it to her silently. Hannah watched. The fake subtitles, the malicious framing, the slow, cruel distortion of their most vulnerable moment. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. When the video ended, her hand shook uncontrollably. She spoke aloud, voice thin. "They made me look pathetic. They made you look like you used me." Brandon didn't reach for her. He knew better. He signed slowly, steadily. "None of it is true. I would never take advantage of you." Her eyes glistened. "I know." But the tremor in her hand said she was reliving every time people treated her differently, because she was deaf. Every moment someone had pitied her. Every time the world told her she was fragile. She signed again, hands unsteady. "But I hate that this is happening because of me." His jaw tightened. He signed firmly. "This is happening because of them, not because of you." She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping. "I thought the Navy years taught me to be strong," she whispered. "But I still hate being seen as less." Brandon stepped closer. His voice was low, deliberate. "You are not less. You never were." Silence, stretched, not empty, but heavy with dread. Then came the knock. 2 base officials stood at the edge of her porch. Mr. Cross once said, speaking clearly enough for Hannah to read easily, "You're being asked to report for an internal inquiry. Allegations of misconduct involving a disabled veteran have been filed." Hannah stiffened. Brandon didn't look away, didn't flinch, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. Hannah stepped forward, fire in her voice. "No. This is wrong." He didn't. One official gently raised a hand. "Ma'am, we need both of you to remain calm. You'll both have the chance to speak." Brandon met Hannah's eyes. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her, for how this would reopen wounds she spent years trying to close. He signed one last message before turning to follow the officials. "I'll be okay. Don't blame yourself." But as he stepped off the porch, Hannah felt something inside her break, because she had finally found someone who understood her silence, and now someone was trying to turn that miracle into a weapon. She clenched her fists, breath trembling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Rain swept across the base that Friday morning, the sky bruised in shades of iron and blue. Soldiers hurried through the courtyard, boots splashing against puddles, jackets pulled tight against the cold drizzle. The world felt tense, heavy with anticipation and whispers of scandal. Inside the military ethics and conduct hall, fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Rows of uniformed officers filled the long, echoing chamber, murmuring among themselves about the inquiry that had brought them there. The rumor mill was already alive. "Did you hear the janitor who pretended to be some kind of hero? They say he manipulated a deaf veteran." "No, I heard she fell for him, and he used it to get sympathy. A shame. He always seemed so quiet. Quiet. Always quiet. Because no one cared to understand that some men lived in silence because the world had given them no other choice. At the front of the hall, Brandon Hale Cross stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders steady, face unreadable. But inside he felt the familiar weight of an old battlefield pressing down on him. He could face danger, gunfire, and broken minds, but public humiliation, accusations of cruelty, being painted as a predator that hid a wound deeper than combat ever had. A panel of officers sat behind a long table. Most looked uncertain. A few looked ready to condemn him before he spoke a word. Mr. Cross, the lead investigator, said, adjusting his glasses, "We are here to examine allegations that you knowingly manipulated and exploited a disabled veteran for personal gain. Do you understand the gravity of these charges?" Brandon nodded. "I do." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Brandon inhaled. He could have spoken. He could have explained everything. But the truth was simple. They didn't want his words. They wanted hers. So he said quietly, "I'd like to wait for one more person." One of the officers scoffed. The alleged victim she may not show. But the door opened. Every head turned. Hannah Reeves stepped inside, not in casual clothes, not looking fragile, not looking ashamed, but in full dress uniform. Deep navy fabric clung cleanly to her shoulders, rows of ribbons and commendations shining boldly across her chest. Her hair was pulled back in a sharp bun. Her stance wasn't of a woman broken by trauma or shaken by rumors, but a commander. A commander who had fought a war, lost more than most could fathom, and was still standing. Whispers swept the room. Is that Commander Reeves? She's here. She came in uniform. That means it meant she wasn't here as a victim. She was here as an officer. Hannah walked down the central aisle with calm, deliberate steps. Rainwater glistened on her jacket sleeves like silver. She reached Brandon's side, and for the first time since the inquiry began, his shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly. She turned to the panel. "I request permission to speak." Commander Reeves, the lead investigator, said, startled. Of course. You may proceed." Hannah faced the room. Her hands rose. Everyone fell silent. She signed with precision, each movement, sharp, authoritative, honed by years of command. Brandon stood beside her, silent interpreter, steady anchor. He translated each word, his voice carrying the weight of both their stories. "My name is Commander Hannah Reeves. I am the woman in the video, and I am here to tell you the truth." The room stilled. Hannah continued signing. "That video is a lie, a cruel fabrication, and it was created to humiliate both of us." Brandon repeated her words aloud, voice steady. Gasps rippled through the hall. Hannah's hands moved faster, fueled by conviction. "Brandon Hale Cross is the first man in years who treated me with dignity. Not pity, not judgment. Dignity." Her lip trembled just slightly, but her posture never wavered. Brandon translated faithfully. The weight of her truth filled the hall like thunder. He did not manipulate me. He spoke my language because he had spent years using it to save soldiers no one else could reach. A murmur swept through the officers. This was news to many. Commander Reeves stepped closer to the panel, eyes sharp. The men responsible for the video, Brett Howard and Alden, targeted him out of jealousy and spite. They mocked my disability. They mocked his kindness. Brandon saw heads turning toward the back row, where the three men sat, stiff and pale. Brandon did not hurt me. He healed me without even meaning to. His respect reminded me that even in silence I am not broken. Her voice cracked on the last signed word. Not out of weakness, but because truth spoken openly had power. Brandon's voice trembled slightly as he repeated her final sentence. The panel sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a testimony or a transformation. Hannah turned to Brandon, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to show how much she trusted someone. She placed her hand lightly over his, steadying herself, steadying him, steadying the truth between them. Then she faced the panel again. If the Navy stands for honor, then the only dishonor in this room lies with the men who twisted a moment of kindness into cruelty. A sharp, collective inhale filled the hall. The investigator leaned forward. "Commander Reeves, are you willing to formally name the individuals responsible?" Hannah didn't hesitate. She pointed directly at Brett, then Howard, then Alden. Silence crashed onto them like a wave. The investigator nodded gravely. "We will gather their statements. Effective immediately, they are suspended pending disciplinary review." Gasps, whispers. Alden hung his head. Howard cursed under his breath. Brett clenched his fists, shaking with anger and humiliation. But justice was finally turning. The investigator turned to Brandon. "Mr. Cross, you are cleared of all allegations. You may return to duty." A quiet breath escaped him, half relief, half disbelief. Then he looked at Hannah. She was watching him, eyes shimmering, not with fear, not with embarrassment, but with pride. Pride in him. Pride in herself. Pride in what they had done together. As the inquiry adjourned, officers stepped aside respectfully as Hannah and Brandon walked down the aisle side by side. Today she hadn't spoken with sound. She had spoken with truth. And today he hadn't stood alone. Outside the rain had softened into a mist. Hannah signed gently. "We survived it." Brandon signed back. "Because you stood up." She shook her head softly. "No, because you believed in me." There in the soft rain and quiet morning light, they shared a moment that was not yet love, but unmistakably the beginning of something powerful. Something worth fighting for. Something worth healing for. Something worth living for. The afternoon light filtered gently through the curtains of Brandon's small living room, scattering warm gold across the wooden floor. The storm from the morning inquiry had passed, leaving the air cleansed, almost tender. It felt like the world itself had exhaled, relieved that the truth had finally surfaced. But within Hannah, the storm still lingered, softened but not gone. She stood in the middle of the room, shoulders, tight eyes drifting to the small speaker Brandon had set on the table. A faint vibration pulsed beneath her feet, steady and rhythmic. Brandon watched her closely, not anxiously, not impatiently, just present, offering space without demanding anything from her. "You don't have to do this today," he said, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. "We can start whenever you're ready." Her hands clasped and unclasped at her sides. "I am ready," she said, though her voice trembled with a nervousness she rarely allowed herself to show. Brandon nodded gently. The therapy method he was about to begin, frequency re-identification, wasn't a miracle cure. It wasn't about restoring full hearing. It was about helping the brain recognize vibrations and tones, again rebuilding pathways scorched by trauma. As a former battlefield psychologist, he had used it with soldiers who suffered blast-induced hearing loss and sensory dissociation. It was slow, it was delicate, and it required trust. Hannah stepped closer to the table. "What will I feel, Libby?" "Nothing at first," Brandon said. "Maybe pressure, maybe a hum, maybe warmth. The goal isn't volume, it's recognition." She nodded. Brandon turned on the device. A low, gentle frequency filled the room, not audible to Hannah's ears, but strong enough to vibrate through the soles of her feet and the palms of her hands when she placed them on the wooden table. She closed her eyes. At first there was nothing. Only the memory of sound, fleeting echoes she couldn't fully summon anymore. Then, something. A light tickle beneath her fingers, a faint tremor, a flutter. Her eyes opened, widening with shock. Brandon smiled. You felt that? She nodded, breath-catching. Barely, but yes. His face softened with quiet pride. Good. That's good. It's a start. Hannah swallowed hard. I thought I'd forgotten what sensation felt like. Brandon shook his head. Your body remembers. It always remembers. She looked at him. Really looked, and something in her chest loosened. Few people had ever given her this much care without expecting something in return. Few had seen her not as broken, but as fighting. The frequency shifted as Brandon adjusted the dial. Hannah felt another wave this time, closer to a low hum like the memory of thunder long after its sound had faded. Her hands trembled, not with fear, with possibility. She blinked, rapidly overwhelmed. It feels like a heartbeat. Brandon's eyes warmed. Exactly. The body recognizes rhythm before it recognizes noise. A silent tear slipped down her cheek. But I'll never hear like before, she whispered. Brandon moved to sit across from her, his tone gentle but unwavering. No, maybe not. She clenched her jaw, looking away. But he continued, softly. You'll hear enough. Enough to feel connected. Enough to feel alive. Enough to remember the world isn't completely silent. Hannah closed her eyes again, letting his words settle, letting them fill spaces she'd kept shut for years. Then Avery peeked her head into the room. Is it working? Hannah laughed, silent, breathy but real. A little? Avery hurried inside, clutching her little notebook. She signed with determination. Do you want to try hearing something else? Hannah smiled. What do you have in mind? Avery pointed to a small metal wind chime hanging near the window, a soft, delicate decoration Elise had bought years ago, its gentle tinkling once a quiet backdrop to their home. Brandon hesitated. That chime had remained untouched since Elise's passing, but when he saw the hopeful look on Avery's face and the readiness in Hannah's, he nodded. Avery walked to the chime and flicked one strand gently. The room vibrated barely faintly, but with a pattern. A familiar shimmering pattern Hannah remembered from long before the blast. She froze. A sound didn't reach her ears, but something reached her heart. She felt the vibrations roll through the floor, up the table into her fingertips. Tears welled up again. It feels soft, she whispered, like a memory of sound. Avery's face lit up. She ran to Hannah and hugged her arm. Daddy says memories are still part of us, even when they're quiet. Brandon groaned softly. Avery! But Hannah laughed this time with startling lightness. It's okay, she said. She's right. The session continued for nearly an hour, frequencies rising and falling vibrations, shifting from barely there tremors to soft pulses she began recognizing, like distant friends returning. She felt alive, awakened, less haunted by the silence. At one point, Brandon stepped behind her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, not intimate, but grounding. Tell me what you feel, he said. She took a steady breath. The hum feels deeper now, and the light tapping reminds me of... She hesitated. Of what he asked softly. She looked at him, eyes shimmering with a mixture of wonder and fear. My mother's voice, she whispered, when she used to hum songs to me as a child. Brandon's heart nearly broke open. Hannah. She shook her head, tears slipping freely now. I don't want to get my hopes up. I know I won't hear everything. But today, I felt something real, something I thought I'd lost forever. Brandon knelt beside her chair so she could read his lips without strain. "You're not chasing the past," he said. "You're building a new present. That's braver than anything you did in the field." Her breath trembled. "Why do you believe in me so much?" His voice softened with an honesty he could no longer hide. "Because someone once believed in me when I had nothing left," he said. "And because you deserve to hear the world again, even if only in pieces." Hannah covered her face with her hands for a moment, overwhelmed, but not by grief, by hope. Avery climbed into her lap, little arms wrapping gently around Hannah's waist. "Family," she signed shyly. Hannah's breath caught. Not because she was frightened, but because the possibility didn't feel impossible anymore. Brandon watched them together, something warm and tender blooming in his chest. This wasn't just therapy. This wasn't just healing. This was the beginning of a new life. A life where silence didn't mean emptiness, where wounds didn't mean brokenness, where love could grow even in the quietest corners. And for the first time in a very long time, Hannah felt her world opening not through sound, but through connection. Through them. Through love she hadn't dared believe she was worthy of. Autumn crept into Virginia, quietly rust-colored leaves drifting across sidewalks, cool breezes sweeping through the trees, and golden sunlight settling gently on rooftops. In the weeks following Hannah's first therapy session, her world began to shift in ways she hadn't dared dream possible. She still lived in silence, yes, but no longer in isolation. The silence now was softened by moments she felt, rather than heard Avery's laughter vibrating against her shoulder when the girl hugged her. Brandon's gentle footsteps as he walked into a room, the subtle pulse of rain against the windows. Small things. Beautiful things. New life growing slowly in the spaces trauma once claimed. But progress rarely came without fear. And for Hannah, fear whispered every time her heart opened. On a late Saturday afternoon, the three of them sat in Brandon's backyard under the maple tree, its branches shading them in a canopy of warm, shimmering gold. Avery was practicing her signing, earnest, focused, and adorably dramatic with every gesture. Hannah watched with a smile touching her lips. Family Avery signed, brows knit in concentration. Hannah's heart squeezed. "You're getting so good." Avery brightened. "Daddy helps me practice. He says it's important to talk to people the way they understand." Hannah's gaze drifted to Brandon, who stood a few steps away watching them with hands in his pockets and a soft, almost shy smile. His eyes held something she recognized now, something that had grown quietly between them. Affection? Tenderness? Maybe even love. It terrified her, not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it too much. When Avery ran inside for juice, Hannah found herself alone with him. The air shifted, the kind of soft, fragile stillness that only existed when two people were cautiously, silently falling for each other. Brandon stepped closer. "She adores you," he said slowly. Hannah smoothed her sweater. "She's easy to adore." He smiled. "You are too." Her breath caught. Words like that, simple, sincere, unpolished, disarmed her more than any explosive ever had. She looked away. "Brandon, I'm afraid." He didn't move, didn't rush her. "Talk to me." Her fingers trembled as she signed, afraid. "I'm not enough." His brows pulled together gently. "For who? For you? For Avery? For a future?" Brandon exhaled softly, stepping close enough for her to read his expression clearly. "Hannah, you are enough exactly as you are." Her eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "You deserve someone whole." He reached out not to touch her, but to bring his hands into her line of sight. "Wholeness isn't the absence of wounds," he signed. "It's the courage to keep living despite them." Her lips parted, breath trembling. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't trying to rewrite her fear. He was simply standing beside her. And somehow, that made the fear feel smaller. But not everyone approved. A week later, while Hannah waited outside the base medical wing for a follow-up appointment, she sensed it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, the subtle shift of attention, the tightening air. 2 officers stood a short distance away, speaking in low tones. She couldn't hear, but could read on their lips. She's seeing him, the janitor. She used to be a commander. How far she's fallen. And him a single dad. What's he hoping to get out of this pity romance? Happens all the time. The words cut, sharper than any blast wave, more personal than any battlefield wound. Her throat tightened. She turned away, hiding the sudden burn behind her eyes. When Brandon arrived to pick her up, he saw it immediately, the tension in her shoulders, the way she clenched and unclenched her hands. What happened? She didn't want to say it, didn't want to drag him into her fears, but hiding it meant letting the shame linger, so she signed slowly. People don't understand. They think you want something from me. Brandon's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with hurt on her behalf. I don't care what people think, he said firmly. But I do, she replied. He nodded, understanding. Then let's face it together. She looked at him, really looked, and saw it again. He wasn't intimidated by her scars. He wasn't overwhelmed by her silence. He wasn't afraid of the world's judgment. But she was. Not of the world, of losing them. That night, the weight of her fear followed her home. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet. Shadows pooled in the corners as she sat on her couch, staring at her muted television, the uneasiness twisting inside her like a forgotten storm. She signed to the empty room. What if I ruin their life? The silence didn't answer. A knock pulled her back. When she opened the door, Avery stood there with a drawing clutched in her hand, Brandon behind her, holding the edges of his jacket nervously. Avery proudly held up her picture. 3 stick figures, a tall one with long hair. Brandon, a medium one with a bun Hannah, a small one labeled with shaky handwriting Avery. Underneath in big blocky letters, family. Hannah's breath caught so sharply she had to grab the doorframe to steady herself. Avery beamed. Daddy says only if you want it. Brandon looked like he wasn't breathing. Avery, he whispered, but Hannah knelt down, tears slipping freely now. Warm, soft, unstoppable. She gently pulled Avery into her arms, holding her tight, feeling the small heartbeat against her cheek. When she stood, she turned to Brandon. Her hands rose, shaking, unsure, but brave. I want to try. Brandon took a breath so deep it shook him. Me too. And then, for the first time, he reached for her, slowly, carefully giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Her hand fit into his like it belonged there. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was a promise, a beginning, a fragile, beautiful step toward something neither of them thought they deserved. Love against the odds, against the whispers, against the fears, had found its way into the quiet. And it was only growing stronger. Riverside Grill looked different at night. The soft amber lighting reflected off the windows like liquid gold. The low murmur of conversation blended with the hush of evening, wrapping the restaurant in a warmth that felt almost nostalgic. It was the same place where everything began, where a cruel joke had turned into an unexpected miracle. But tonight it felt like something else entirely, like destiny coming full circle. Brandon stood just outside the entrance, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. His pulse beat steady but strong, each thump echoing a mixture of nerves and certainty. He hadn't felt this way in a long time, not since before Elise, not since before grief had carved permanent shadows into his heart. But Hannah had changed things, not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way sunlight slowly warms a cold room. Now he felt ready, ready for the next step, ready to open his heart again, ready to build something new. A soft vibration touched the ground beneath his feet. He turned. Hannah approached slowly from the parking lot, the evening breeze catching her hair, her navy blue dress shifting gently with each step. She looked elegant, serene, yet there was something vulnerable in her eyes, a softness that made Brandon's breath catch. She smiled when she reached him, the expression delicate but full. "Hi," she said, letting him read her lips clearly. "Hi," he echoed. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing, neither knowing how to take the next step without savoring the quiet beauty of this one. Finally, Brandon offered his arm. Hannah slipped her hand through it without hesitation. Inside, the staff recognized them instantly. Some smiled discreetly. Others pretended not to stare. And a few, those who had seen the prank unfold weeks earlier, watched with something like awe. Life could be cruel, but it could also be poetic. Their table was by the window, lit by a single candle flickering gently between them. Hannah brushed her fingers over the edge of her water glass, grounding herself. "This feels surreal," she said softly. Brandon nodded. "It does." She studied him, head slightly tilted. "You look nervous." He gave a sheepish laugh. "Maybe." Why he didn't answer, not yet. He needed the right moment, the moment she deserved. They talked over dinner slowly, deeply, like two people unhurried by time. They spoke with words, with hands, with expressions, with quiet comfort that said more than language ever could. Hannah shared memories of her service days, moments before the blast, the weight of command, the comrades she lost. Brandon listened with a tenderness that soothed the cracks in her voice. Brandon shared memories of Elise, not the painful ones, but the beautiful ones. How she laughed, how she danced in the kitchen, how Avery looked just like her when she scrunched her nose. Instead of aching, Hannah felt honored to hear about her. That, too, surprised her. There was no room for jealousy in a heart that was healing, only room for understanding. By the time their plates were cleared, the candle had burned low. The restaurant was quieter now, just a few lingering diners, the staff wiping down tables, the city lights glowing beyond the glass windows. Avery had fallen asleep an hour earlier, at home with her grandmother, allowing Brandon this moment. The moment he'd been preparing for. He took a slow breath. "Hannah," he said, making sure she could read every word. "There's something I want to say." Her eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. Brandon stood, then moved to her side of the table. Gently, he reached for her hands. She gave them freely. He didn't drop to one knee, not yet. That wasn't the way he wanted to communicate this. He lifted his hands instead, and signed. Slowly, beautifully, with a tenderness that made her vision blur. "I want us to be a family." Her lips parted, a trembling breath escaping. He continued, signing, voice quiet but steady for her to follow. "Not because you complete me, not because I need fixing, not because you fill a void, but because when I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I never thought I would again." Tears welled in her eyes. Brandon's hands moved again, forming the words that had been in his heart since the day Avery hugged her in the living room. "I want to build a life with you, slowly, gently, fully. Not to replace what we lost, but to create something new out of who we are now." Her breath faltered. Her shoulders shook. He signed the final line. "Will you let me be your family?" Silence, the soft kind, the beautiful kind. Hannah lifted her trembling hands, unable to speak, unable to form a sentence, so she signed instead, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Yes, I want this. I want you. I want us." Brandon didn't hesitate anymore. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her with the care of a man who knew how fragile the human heart could be, and how precious it was when it trusted again. Hannah pressed her cheek to his chest, eyes closing as she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, strong, warm, real. For so long she had believed she was a burden, someone broken, someone forgotten by fate. But tonight, in the same place where humiliation had been planned for her love, stood in its place, instead, quiet, powerful, undeniable. When they pulled apart, Hannah wiped her tears with a shaky laugh. Avery is going to be so excited. Brandon smiled, eyes softening. She already thinks you're part of our family. Hannah exhaled, overwhelmed. I think I want that more than anything. He squeezed her hand. Then it's yours. Outside, the night had settled in completely, stars scattered like whispers across the sky. They walked out of the restaurant side by side, hands intertwined, hearts steady. It wasn't a grand proposal. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was better. It was two broken souls choosing each other, choosing healing, choosing hope, choosing love in its quietest, most honest form. A new beginning born from a cruel setup, forged through courage, sealed with trust. And they were just getting started. A full year had passed since the night Brandon, kneeling without kneeling, asked Hannah if she would become his family. A year since the cruel prank that had brought them together. A year since silence had begun to shift from something painful into something peaceful. Now, on a warm spring morning, sunlight spilled across the Cross family's tiny home, as if blessing it. The living room, once quiet, gentle, and orderly, was now a symphony of newborn cries, Avery's giggles, and the soft rush of life. Hannah sat on the couch, cradling a small, warm bundle against her chest. Her son, her child, slept contentedly. Tiny hands curled into perfect fists. His breath puffed softly against her collarbone. She still couldn't hear the sound, but she could feel it. And that was enough to make her heart feel full to overflowing. Avery knelt on the rug in front of her, eyes wide with wonder. Mommy, can I hold him now? Hannah smiled, still always a little stunned when Avery called her Mommy. It had begun one quiet morning, unprompted, after months of bonding, after dozens of bedtime stories, told with signed characters and soft touches. The word had fallen from Avery's lips like a miracle. Hannah nodded. Of course, sweet girl. Sit very still. She placed the baby gently in Avery's lap, guiding her small arms around her brother. Avery looked down with awe that shimmered across her entire face. He's so tiny, Avery whispered. Brandon stepped into the room, drying his hands on a towel, watching the scene unfold with a tenderness that almost broke him. You're doing great, Avery, he said softly. Hannah looked up at him, and even after a year together, the sight of him still hit her with quiet force. Not because of his looks, though those never failed to warm her, but because she saw in him the man he had spent years hiding, patient, steady, brave, endlessly kind. A man built for love. A man built to heal, even while still healing himself. Brandon eased into the seat beside Hannah, resting an arm on the back of the couch as he watched Avery rock gently. She's a natural, he murmured. She is, Hannah agreed. Brandon noticed her distant expression. What are you thinking? Hannah swallowed, tears gathering. I didn't know life could feel like this again. He took her hand. You built this life, he said. Piece by piece. She shook her head softly. We built it. Her fingers tightened around his. Later that afternoon, the four of them walked along the riverside path near the edge of town, the same place Brandon had taken Avery on countless father-daughter days. Hannah carried the baby in a soft sling across her chest, his tiny body warm against her. The world was alive. Birds gliding over the water, families picnicking beneath budding trees, the scent of spring grass mingling with the breeze. Hannah soaked it all in, not through sound, but through sensation, through memory, through presence, through love. Brandon stopped as they reached a quiet spot beneath a blooming dogwood tree, a patch of sunlight turning the grass golden. He looked at her eyes bright. "Ready," he mouthed. She nodded, her heart swelling. Avery ran ahead and knelt beside the blanket to set up the small portable speaker Brandon had brought. He placed Hannah's palm lightly on the device. A low hum vibrated through it, a vibration Hannah now recognized without fear. She had practiced with Brandon for months, learning to tell the difference between frequencies, rhythms, even atmospheric pressure shifts. Today the hum felt different, steady, soft, almost musical. A lullaby. One Brandon had found and slowed down into vibrations she could feel. Hannah's breath hitched, tears filled her eyes as she signed softly. "It feels like he's singing." Brandon nodded, watching her with a love so full it made his voice tremble. "He is," he mouthed. Their son stirred in the sling and let out a quiet cry, and for the first time in years, Hannah didn't just feel the vibration. She heard something, a faint sound, fragile, wavering, distant like the echo of a memory. But real. Her hands flew to her mouth. A broken sob slipped from her, a sound she could barely hear, but felt echo inside her chest like a sunrise breaking open. Brandon froze, stunned. "Hannah," he whispered. She looked at him with flooding emotion. "I heard him," she signed through tears. "I heard our son cry." Avery gasped and launched herself into Hannah's side, wrapping her arms around her, careful of the baby. "Mommy heard him." She squealed. Brandon knelt beside them, tears falling openly, a man once broken now made whole by the simplest miracle, a sound that only existed because love had rebuilt a life. He pressed his forehead to Hannah's, their tears mingling. "You did this," he whispered. "You fought your way back to this moment." She shook her head fiercely, emotion overflowing. "We fought together." Their son cried again, and though the sound was faint, imperfect, touched by the blur of damaged nerves and stubborn healing, Hannah heard it. Her heart shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. "I never thought I'd hear anything again," she whispered, voice shaking. "But I heard him. I really heard him." Brandon held her, held Avery, held the tiny miracle pressed against her chest. No more silence, not the kind that hurt, only the kind that cradled, held, healed. The four of them sat beneath the blooming dogwood, wrapped in the light of a gentle sun that warmed their skin and filled the spaces where grief had once lived. And for the first time since the blast took her hearing, Hannah realized she never needed the world to sound like it once did. She only needed these sounds, the faint cry of her child, the heartbeat of the man she loved against her cheek, the laughter she could feel from Avery's small, shaking shoulders. A family, her family, born from a cruel joke, forged in healing, strengthened by love, and made whole by the simplest sound in the world, a baby's cry. As the sun dipped low, Brandon whispered the words she read easily on his lips. "Home. This is home." And in a world of imperfect sound and perfect love, Hannah believed him. With all her heart. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional journey. Before you go, we'd love to know something simple yet meaningful. Where are you watching from? Whether it's from a small town, a big city, or somewhere peaceful in between, your presence here truly matters to us. Feel free to share it in the comments. We read everyone. And if stories about kindness, quiet heroes, and second chances speak to your heart, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling uplifting stories that inspire hope and healing every day. Finally, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us today. We're grateful you're here, and we hope this story brought you a little comfort, a little light, or a little reminder that goodness still exists in this world. Until next time, stay safe, stay blessed, and take good care of yourself.